Today, I want to look at the subject of grace. After the poll showed that's what people wanted this video to be about, but I've entitled it Working with God, because that's kind of what grace allows us to do. Grace is given by God, and it allows him to work with imperfect people. If God was exacting in everything that he requires of us, and he would accept no less, then we wouldn't be able to have any relationship with him at all. And the word that we translate as grace, the Hebrew word chen, as we'll see, it doesn't have a proper English translation. It's a Hebrew concept, and we can put words around it that kind of are some aspects of it, but really we need to just understand it as chen. And chen is something that allows God to work with us, because obviously we're trying to work with an absolutely flawless, perfect being, and we can never match up to his standards. So he has to have some slippage, so to speak. He has to allow certain failures on our part in order for the work to be done at all. So that's kind of what God's grace is. It's been misunderstood. I think the idea that you often get in Christianity is kind of God as a kind of a mellowing grandfather sort of figure. Like he was really harsh in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament he's kind of mellowed out a bit, and he has begun to give grace. And that idea is reflected in certain translations. We see in the King James Version, it says, "For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ." And you can see why, if you read that, you would think, well, there's a juxtaposition there between the law and grace and truth. But that's not actually what it says. The italics here should alert you to the fact that there is no but that is there. That's something that has been put in there by the translators according to their understanding. And you'll often see this in translations. The translators will try and tell you what they think is being said. And sometimes that's useful, and sometimes it's not. But the insertion of "but" there really changes how that verse is read. In the ISR, it's rendered, "And out of his completeness we all did receive." And favour or grace, the Greek word is charis, upon charis. For the Torah was given through Moshe. The favour / grace, the charis, and the truth came through Yeshua Messiah. So the Torah did not contain a provision for grace, because the Torah is the law. So there is no provision in the law for grace if you break it. It's just the law. That's what you're supposed to do. Grace came by Yeshua through his blood being shed for us to be cleansed and forgiven of our sins. If a judge gives you grace for breaking the law, there is no provision in the law for that. The law states what should be done. If you break that, it is then another person who must give you grace. So this isn't saying the law came through Moshe, but grace and truth came through Yeshua. It's saying the law was given by Moshe, grace and truth came by Yeshua. It doesn't mean that the law has been superseded by that grace. The Torah can't give you grace, as I say. That's not its purpose. All the Torah is for is to tell you what you should be doing and not be doing. We see the word here, charis. This is the word that is used in the Septuagint when chen is used in the Masoretic text. We see that in Genesis 6:8. It says, Noah found charis in the eyes of Yehovah. It actually says charin if you read the Greek that's used there, but it's a form of charis. It's not worth getting into it. It's essentially the same word, or it is the same word with a different letter at the end. Now, the Hebrew word was chen, and as I say, we don't have a good translation of it. You see favour, grace, charm there on Blue Letter Bible, but something that you should be aware of. When Blue Letter Bible uses this section, outline of biblical usage, all that is how the people at Blue Letter Bible think that word is used in the Bible. So sometimes it will be accurate if they've got an accurate meaning of the word. Sometimes it will be inaccurate. You'll see in the Torah commentary, which is almost finished, it's almost ready to go to print now. You'll see in that I've done word entries that are like this, with how I understand the word to be used in the Bible. But it's not a definition. These things don't define the word. Sometimes definitions are good, and sometimes the doctrine of the person defining the word is bad, so they will give a bad definition. And the same is true to a larger extent with the outline of biblical usage. So that's how they understand the word to be used in the Bible. But that's not what the word means per se. As I say, we don't have a good English word to swap for chen. Chen is something that you must understand, so that when you read the English word, be it favour or grace, they are probably the closest that we have. Favour more so. Grace is kind of a bit of a woolly term that can mean all sorts of things. When you see favour or grace, understand that it is the Hebrew concept of chen. You've got the Hebrew concept of chen, and just as when we translate it into English, we don't really have a perfect word for it. The same is true in Greek. Charis in Greek is, again, a bit more of a woolly concept that draws in other concepts. So if you try to understand the Greek word and what that means and try to define grace as that will lead to some aberrations as well. In Genesis 33:4 it says, and Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, who are these with you? And he said, the children with whom Elohim has favoured or graced your servant. So there we see the verb root of chen. Chen is a noun. It's a concept. It refers to the concept that we know as grace. But all Hebrew words have a verb root. It's the action behind the noun, if you like. So the verb root here is chanan. That is what someone does when they show chen. So if you are to favour someone or be graceful towards them, you will chanan to them. Sometimes we see it phrased like this: the children whom Elohim has favoured your servant. And sometimes we see it actually written here as Yehovah gives grace. That could be Yehovah Chanan, but that's not what the Hebrew actually says here. The Hebrew says that the verb is Natan or Nathan, to give something, and the thing that is being given is Chen. The noun is being given. The noun is being operated on by the verb. So in English, we see things rendered in a certain way that doesn't really convey to us what the Hebrew says. This could be written in Hebrew, this sentence as Yehovah Chanans, but that's not what it says. It says Yehovah Nathans Chen. So the English can kind of lead us astray. The same is true with the Greek. We have to remember when we read charis that that's not the concept that we're reading about. There is a related word in Hebrew. You see here when it's talking about the root word, it says compare this word, which is chanan. So this is a related word to chanan, to show chen. And this actually means to encamp in the context that we're looking at it, which is interesting. It kind of gives us a broader perspective on the word chanan, what it is for Yehovah to show grace. We look at the related word chana. We see in Psalm 57, show me favor or grace, chanan. Again, O Elohim, show me favor or grace. For in my soul, in you rather, my soul is taking refuge. And in the shadow of your wings, I take refuge. So we see here, it says, Chanan Yehovah, because I take refuge in you. So the concept of showing grace to somebody is involved with the idea of them taking refuge in you. Psalm 37, it says, the angel of Yehovah, Chana, all around those who fear him. So this concept of to show favor or to show grace is connected with this word chana, means to encamp around. The idea of asking for grace from Yehovah is to seek refuge in him and for him to encamp around you. So we get a much broader idea when we look at the Hebrew, which is used rather than the English or the Greek that is used. To be given grace by Yehovah is to take refuge in him and for him to kind of take you under his wing and to look after you. That's much closer to the idea of chen. We see in Joel 2, verse 11, it says, And Yehovah shall give forth his voice before his army. For his camp, that word is machneh, which is to Chana, what Chain is to Hanan. So Hanan is the verb to show favor or grace. Chain is the concept, that is what is being shown. Machneh is also a noun like Chain. And Chana is the verb which is operating in the noun. So his camp, his machneh, is related, or where the verb chana, to encamp, is operating. His machneh is very great, for mighty is the doer of his word. For the day of Yehovah is great and very awesome, and who does bear it? So this idea of the ones to whom he shows grace are the ones who fear him, the ones who do his word. The ones who do his word, he encamps around. Those who fear him, he encamps around. And that is part of the concept of him showing grace to them. Now we'll see that there's a more specific part of that, which is what I was talking about at the beginning. Him basically allowing people to be flawed in order to achieve something. But the broader concept is that he encamps around those people, and he allows them space to work out whatever issues are within them. He doesn't expect them to be perfect. He just puts them under his wing, and he begins to guide them. So in the Septuagint, we saw that the Greek word is charis. Charis here, as I say, it's just the Greek translation of a Hebrew word. It's like the closest Greek word to the concept. Just like favor or grace, they don't actually describe the concept, and neither does the Greek word. So when you have people who start reading in the New Testament and think that they can understand exactly what is being said by the Greek words, they are miles off what the Hebrew is actually conveying. So when the New Testament speaks of us being shown grace, we have to go back to the Hebrew to understand it. The word chana that we saw, to encamp, the verb chana, is the verb that we see with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when it says that they pitched their tent. That is the word chana. Often we talk about grace in a completely abstract way, but the concept, the Hebrew concept, is necessary for us to understand. If we just try to understand it from charis, then we kind of get a really fuzzy outline of what grace actually is. The concept of grace is absolutely inexplicable outside of understanding what it is to be in relationship with Yehovah and to have come to his word and to be a servant on the earth. So you need to have come to repentance, you need to have submitted to Yehovah in order for him to begin to work in your life. And grace is what is needed for him to be able to start making changes. If he just expected us to be perfect immediately, then nobody would be changed by his word, because we're all imperfect. It's kind of like if you have a contract with somebody to do some work for you. If that contract said that things had to be done in a certain way, and the person who was doing it did something wrong, either you could litigate against them. Every misstep, you litigate against them. But that's not going to get you anywhere as far as getting the work done. Or you could accept that they're going to make mistakes and just say, this is wrong. I need you to work on this, do this differently. And that will actually get the work done for you. Same with Yehovah. If he was to impute to us every act of unrighteousness, then we would never get to a point where we have been shaped and molded by him. Grace is necessary when you're working with human beings in order to actually move forward, especially in the case of Yehovah. If he wants us to be conformed to the image of his son, then he has to accept that we will make mistakes. He created us in this way that we would make mistakes. He knows the end from the beginning. Not that he wants us to make those mistakes, just that he shows grace when we do make mistakes, just in order to be able to move forward with us. And the same is true with us in our relationships with people. Not just if somebody's doing something for you and you've got an agreement with them, but if somebody does something wrong, you can either hold that against them, or you can be gracious, as Yehovah is gracious, and say, okay, well, that wasn't good in the past. It's good to acknowledge that something is not good. But the only thing you can do is move forward and try to make it right in the future. So when we're dealing one with another, there's no point dwelling on things that have not been perfect or things that have been bad in the past. All that we can do is come to an agreement with the person to move forward towards something that is better. In Acts 15 verse 5, it says, and some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees rose up, saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Moshe. And this was a debate about Gentile believers who were now becoming a part of Israel. And a certain sect of the Pharisees were saying, we need to circumcise them and command them to keep the Torah of Moshe. That's what is necessary. Tell them everything in the Torah necessary to circumcise them, whereas the way that Yehovah works is different. We can see his grace in how James instructs them. In Acts 15:19-21, James says, therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to Elohim, but that we should write to them to abstain from the defilements of idols, and from whoring or fornication, and from what is strangled, and from blood. For from ancient generations Moshe has in every city those proclaiming him, being read in the congregation every Sabbath. So what is he saying? He's saying, no, we don't need to start with them getting circumcised and them doing all of the Torah. Tell them 4 things. Just give them some basics to go forward with. And then as they hear Moshe being preached, they'll begin to do Moshe. That's a really good example of Yehovah's grace. Okay, I don't expect you to be perfect at the beginning, but as you learn what I expect of you, you begin to implement it. Again, the grace is necessary in order for them to be able to come to Elohim. Don't trouble them at first with all of the requirements, but as they learn it, they'll begin to do it, because that's how the relationship works. It's God's chen to accept them at first when they turn to him, and then to mold them as they go. And that's, of course, how it works in our relationship with Yehovah. In Ephesians 2, we see grace being explained. Without grace, it would be impossible to be reconciled to him. It says, "And you were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the ruler of the authority of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience." So that Yahuwah has children who are obedient and children who are disobedient. "Among whom also we all once lived in the lusts of our flesh." That's how the children of disobedience are. They follow the urges of their flesh, "doing the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, as also the rest. But Elohim, who is rich in compassion, because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in trespasses, made us alive together with Messiah. By charis, by chen, you have been saved. And raised us up together and made us sit together in the heavenlies in Messiah Yeshua, in order to show in the coming ages the exceeding riches of his chen in kindness toward us in Messiah Yeshua. For by chen you've been saved through belief or faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of Elohim. It is not by works, so that no one should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Messiah Yeshua unto good works, which Elohim prepared beforehand that we should work in them. So what that's getting across is that it's by Elohim's grace that we're saved. It's not because we've been great, because we've kept the law. It's not our works that afford us salvation. It is faith, which is seen in obeying Yehovah, that he comes and he encamps around us and he shows us grace and he molds us and he shows us what his word says and he changes us in line with his word. He conforms us to the image of Yeshua. People will say it's by grace through faith, not of works. So you don't need to follow the Torah. But what they miss is verse 10 there. It says that this has been done where his workmanship, he is working on us unto good works. So it's not by works that we're saved, but the process of being given grace is to lead to good works in the end, which Elohim prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Again, he's outside of time. He knows those who will submit to him, submit to his word, and he knows the effect that that will have. And he foreordained it from the beginning that it would be like that. He knew the response of people at certain times, and he knew the effect that that would then have in their lives and in the lives of the people around them. Romans 4:4 Again, another letter of Paul. It says, and to him who is working, the reward is not reckoned as gain, but as a debt. So this puts a fine point on it. The grace that we are given is not something that Yehovah owes to us because of our amazing works. It is something that Yehovah gives us despite our works and the things that we have done in the past. He gives us grace. He looks over those things and he says, okay, those things were bad. Let's move forward to something better. Genesis 12:11-13 says, and it came to be when he was close to entering Mitzrayim, that he said to Sarai, his wife, see, I know that you are a fair woman to look at. Sarai is how that is pronounced in Hebrew. And it shall be when the Mitzrites, the Egyptians, see you, that they shall say, this is his wife, and they shall kill me, but let you live. Please say you are my sister, so that it shall be well with me for your sake, and my life be spared because of you. So Abraham here tells us that he, or told Sarai and us when we read of it, that if they think that she is his wife, they will kill him. So he wants to deceive them. He wants her to say that she is his sister. Later he will say in Genesis 21 that actually she is his half-sister. But his purpose is explained here to be to deceive these people. And this is an example of Yehovah's grace, how he comes and encamps around Abraham. Abraham is not perfect. We see him lying here instead of trusting in Yehovah. We see that he wants to deceive people instead. But Yehovah is with him. He's encamped around him, and he will make sure that things will work out in the best way for Abraham. And we see that when Abraham leaves Egypt, in Genesis 12:20, and Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had, everything that he had been increased by in Egypt. So even though Abraham had done something wrong, Yehovah is still encamped around him, and he makes sure that he is protected. And Pharaoh sends him away with wealth. So the black and white sort of idea of Yehovah that Job's friends seem to have is not right. It's not, well, if you do good, then Elohim will do good to you. If you do bad, Elohim will do bad to you. It's much more subtle and nuanced than that. Abraham did bad, but he has Yehovah's grace. Now, Abraham might do good, and Yehovah bring upon him something that he perceives immediately as bad, but it's for a purpose. Just like we see with Jeremiah being cast into the cistern. Jeremiah was a servant of Yehovah, and yet he found himself in a position that he wouldn't have thought, oh, this is good, this is working out great. But in that position, it enabled him to be given bread during the siege when nobody had any food. So Abraham does something bad. We see good things happening to him in his life, and that is because of Yehovah's grace. Even though Abraham is not perfect, we see a promise being given to him. I shall establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you in their generation for an everlasting covenant. I shall give to you and your seed after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I shall be their Elohim. So an amazing promise which is given. But in order for Yahovah to get to that point, for the kingdom to be on the earth, he needs to give grace to Abraham. He's not going to walk perfectly before Yahovah, but he has the desire to believe Elohim, to do what he says. So Elohim can work with a person who is submitted to them, and he can show grace to them. But the idea that he shows grace to the disobedient is to just completely misunderstand the idea of grace. If you have chosen to disobey Yahovah in your life in some aspect, to presume upon his grace in that situation is folly. It's just to not understand what grace is. To just sin willfully and presume that Yahovah is going to give you grace doesn't make any sense. We see the same with David. It says, it came to be in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter saying, set Uriah in the front of the heaviest battle, and you shall turn away from him, and he shall be smitten and shall die. So he had impregnated Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. He brings Uriah home and tries to engineer a situation wherein Uriah will sleep with his wife so that he will think that the child is his. This Uriah was a great warrior for Israel. When that doesn't work, what David does is he writes this letter to say, put Uriah in a position where he will die. And he sends it by Uriah's hand. So this is a very wicked thing that David does. But Yahovah achieves his purposes through David. We see that Yahovah, he uses David greatly. We see that he corrects him in what he has done that is bad. But he doesn't just cast him away. We see the result of this after Uriah is dead. It says, and when her mourning was over, this is Bathsheba's mourning, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the deed that David had done was evil in the eyes of Yahovah. Without grace, David would be done for if Yahovah wasn't willing to say, okay, you've done a great evil in my eyes. I will correct you, but I will forgive you if you repent. Without that, then all of the things that David did subsequent to this would not be the case. So Yahovah had a purpose, and in order to facilitate his relationship with human beings, he has to give chen. And just like with Abraham, this is said to David. I have made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn to my servant David. I establish your seed forever and shall build up your throne to all generations. Even though David had slept with another man's wife and then killed that man by sending him to the front line, even though he'd done that, he still has this promise from Yahovah because David is important to Yahovah. He has a heart after Yahovah's heart, not in the murder and the adultery and all the bad things that he did, but he gets that he needs to be submitted to Yahovah. You just need to read Psalm 119 to see how David felt about Yahovah's word. He was willing to be changed by it, and that is the position that we need to be in. Except, look, we're flawed. We're going to make mistakes, but willfully making mistakes and presuming upon Yahovah's chen is completely different to setting your sights on the word, walking in the word, and then something happening and you making a bad decision in the moment, recognizing it as a terrible decision, casting it off, repenting of it, and then getting back on the path. I can't guarantee you that chen will be shown to you, but they are the circumstances in which Yahovah shows chen. Psalm 84, verse 11 again, it says, "For Yahovah Elohim is a sun and a shield. Yahovah gives chen, he chanans and esteem. He withholds no good matter from those who walk blamelessly." And the idea of walking blamelessly, Charlie's mentioned this, it doesn't mean that you're going to be flawless. It's like wearing a clean shirt and trying not to get it dirty. If you get it dirty, then you will have to cleanse the shirt. But that's not how you would go about your life. Oh, I'll just get the shirt dirty and clean it. The way you would go about your life, you've got a nice shirt, is you would want to keep it clean. So those are the people whom Yahovah will encamp around. Those are the people to whom Yahovah shows chen. In Proverbs 24:15-16 it says, "Do not lie in wait, O wrong one, against the dwelling of the righteous. Do not ravage his resting place. For 7 times a righteous man falls and rises, but the wrong one stumbles into evil." So we can see it in the lives of Abraham, in the life of David, or David in English. We can see it in the life of Jacob, that he really went astray at some points, but Yahovah was encamped around him and brought him to the right place ultimately. And chen will take different forms. Sometimes giving grace, giving chen, will take the form of leniency with you. He'll kind of just let some things go. Sometimes it will take the form of him rebuking false ideas that you've had and saying, no, that's not right. Rather than just saying, that's not right, let's move on past it. Sometimes he'll want to rebuke things that you thought before, but that is his grace. Sometimes it will take the form of encouragement, and that's him being gracious to you. Sometimes it will take the form of refining or punishment, but his refining or punishment is also his grace. It's part of him coming and encamping around you in your life and getting you to the right place. All of it is grace, and yet only really leniency would be recognized by a lot of people who would profess to follow the Bible. So I hope that's enabled you to see what is really being spoken of in the New Covenant writings, how we see it in the Old Testament, and give you a new appreciation of how Yahovah is working in your life, what his grace is to you. So Yahovah willing, I will see you next week.